Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Cow. I'm Crowley, beat writer and recruit analyst at Happy Valley Insider of the Rivals Network, covering Penn State athletics. I'm joined by my co-host today, as always, Anthony Nazan, our resident superfan, and my colleague at Happy Valley Insider, Marty Leap. Gentlemen, we have two things to discuss here today. We have one: Penn State defeated UMass on Saturday, 63-0. Result was never in doubt. The Nittany Lions dominated from start to finish, really, and we'll talk about that. But first, we have a major story to talk about right now before we discuss that. Something that happened just before we got on the podcast here on Monday evening. Penn State has landed four-star Rivals 250 defensive end Jaylen Harvey, the 25th commitment in the recruiting class for the Nittany Lions. And this is one, gentleman, that is a long time coming for Penn State. A kid they've been recruiting since April of 2022. Well, we've had future casts in for Harvey over at Happy Valley Insider since last October, nearly a year ago today. This one, like I said, a long time coming. It didn't always look like Harvey was going to end up at Penn State. But Monday night, he picks the Nittany Lions over USC and Maryland, giving them their 25th commitment. Like I said, Harvey, the 222nd ranked player nationally, according to Rivals, 9th best player in the state of Maryland, and the 20th best strong side defensive end in the country. 6'2", 245, 250 pounds, but a very twitchy defensive end, great athlete. Very similar, dare I say, to a fellow Quince Orchard product in Chop Robinson. So I guess, Anthony, let me start with you. What's your initial thoughts here on Penn State finally landing Jaylen Harvey?
Yeah, my initial thoughts are that, James Franklin, Dion Barnes, and the rest of that staff deserve a ton of credit for getting this one across the line. It was a total team effort. I can only imagine, what we saw on the outside looking in. It looked like a marathon with a lot of ups and downs, a lot of twists and turns. They led for about probably the first 70% of this recruitment, and then the pendulum just kept swinging back and forth. But they deserve so much credit for sticking with this one, being patient, being persistent, and finally landing one of their top targets. They never wavered on that. They never wavered on the fact that Jaylen
Yeah.
Harvey was one of their top defensive end targets. And it just goes to show how hard recruiting can be sometimes, and how we're not cut out to be on a recruiting staff. Some people
Yep.
might think that they could do it. You can't
Yep.
do it. It's a lot of work. It's a 24/7 365
Sure.
job, and I don't think any recruitment exemplified that more than Jaylen Harvey. So huge shout out to the staff. And yeah, they got a really talented player. I think, from a first step standpoint, Harvey is comparable to Chop Robinson. I think
Yeah.
Chop is a little bit more of a polished prospect coming out of high school. I don't know if Harvey is an immediate day one guy like Chop had the potential to be, but he's a guy that, down the road, maybe a year or two, he's a guy that could be, a big force in that rotation. And yeah,
Yeah.
Penn State's going to be very happy to have him.
Yeah. Harvey a little bit smaller than Chop Robinson. Robinson's listed, I think, at 6'3", 254. Harvey right now is listed on Rivals at 6'2", 243. I believe Adam Friedman said in his recent post that he's now closer to that 250 mark, which is, definitely a good weight for that size, and he carries it well. You can see on tape. He's added probably 20, 30 pounds, over the last couple of years, and you still see that quickness and athleticism, the first step, like you said. From a size and first step comparison, I think Robinson is a good comparison. I do agree, Robinson probably a little bit more polished coming out of high school. Marty, what's your thoughts on Jaylen Harvey as a prospect and just what Penn State had to go through to land this commitment? Like Anthony said, this was one that, they weren't always in the lead. They had to go through some trials and tribulations to land Harvey, but they stuck with it. This is a big win for not just James Franklin, but also Dion Barnes, who in his first year as the Nittany Lions defensive line coach, I'm not sure he could have put together a better class of defensive linemen when you're talking about pure potential. I know they missed on Benedict Ume earlier this summer, but outside of Ume, they have put together a really damn good defensive line class, and one that has potential through the roof.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Anthony said. It's just a tremendous job by the staff to stay on Harvey, keep him as arguably their top edge rushing prospect. I know a lot of people got Jaylen Harvey fatigue as his recruitment went on, but you never move on from a recruit like this. The kid has top of the class twitch, top of the class explosiveness. I think his overall rating is probably held back somewhat by the fact he is only 6'2", so there is some
Yeah.
cap there with that potential because he's not going to have that like freakish length or anything you see from like a guy like Denai Dennis Sutton, for example. But yeah, the chop comparison, obviously it's a bit of a lazy one because they're from the same school and everything, but it's a good one. I think there's a lot of similarities in their game. I'm with you guys where I think Chop was more game ready as a freshman than Harvey. I think Harvey won't have to play early at Penn State, but he could if need be.
Yeah.
And also just staying with Quince Orchard, it doesn't hurt. We've seen the relationship with McDonough and everything that is provided for Penn State in recent years. Well, you didn't land him out of high school, but you got Chop in the transfer portal. And obviously, Chop is enjoying his time at Penn State 10 times more than he ever was at Maryland. You have Jaylen Harvey now. Xavier Gilliam's also a Quince Orchard player. It doesn't hurt to cultivate those relationships with one of the more talented schools in the region.
Yeah, I greatly said there. And I think for me, the thing that stands out really about Harvey as a player is that the upside here is, extraordinarily high. You can see it on his film, that athleticism, that first step, the burst in his game. It's I know it's a lot of expectations put on a kid, and he may or may not hit them. But I think when we're talking about a ceiling for a kid like Jaylen Harvey, we're talking about a multi-year starter who could be an all Big Ten level defensive end for the Nittany Lions. This is a guy who they can build a defensive line around. And we've seen them, have success with Chop Robinson. Don't forget, Chop Robinson was a linebacker at Maryland. Penn State moves into defensive end. He becomes the best defensive end, arguably, in the country. He's going to be a potential top 10 draft pick next April. And he was playing linebacker down in College Park. Harvey, similar size, similar, skill set, comes to Penn State. Is he going to have the same success? Who knows? But you have to like what Penn State's done with a similar player in Robinson. You add the potential that Harvey has, and I think it's very hard for Penn State fans not to be excited about this commitment for the Nittany Lions. I know he's not highly ranked as he was maybe a year or so ago, but this is still a damn good player and still a player that could be a driving force of dominant Penn State defensive lines in the future. And it just continues the trend of the Nittany Lions, going into Maryland, landing these elite prospects that turn into, big time players for the Nittany Lions down the road. They've had some misses across the years, but they've had a lot more hits. I guess any additional thoughts on Harvey as a prospect, a player? Anything additional thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah, just to wrap it all up with Harvey, like I know what Marty said about the Harvey fatigue. It's been over a year, I think, in this recruitment. Like obviously you said they offered in April of 2022. You put in your future cast back in October of 2022. So we're literally sitting on a year of hearing about, Jaylen Harvey and his recruitment. So I get it, but I'm just going to say that there's a reason why they never wavered, and there's a reason why they didn't just walk away, because I'm sure there were multiple times where they could have just walked away and said, you know what, screw it, this isn't worth it to put in this time and energy. But they stuck with it for a reason. The kid's really good. The kid's got a really high ceiling, and you pair him with Malachi Williams, another edge rusher who has an incredibly high ceiling, and the future is still incredibly bright at defensive end for Penn State. It's still going to be incredibly fun to watch that unit work.
Yeah, and as I pass on to Marty, you can expand on that, but also you talk about those two defensive ends, but you add in the potential at defensive tackle, T.A. Cunningham. I know there's going to be a lot of question marks about what type of player he can be for Penn State, and a lot of them are fair. He hasn't seen the field a ton. Therefore, we haven't seen a lot of tape on T.A. Cunningham over the last few years, but the potential that Cunningham has is off the charts. Liam Andrews, a guy who could play on both sides of the line could play on both sides of the line for Penn State, is going to start on the defensive line, projects well to a defensive tackle. He has the athleticism the strength, the size to be an elite defensive tackle for Penn State going forward. And then I mean, you got DeAndre Cook and Xavier Gilliam as well, two guys who maybe don't have the upside of those other four guys, but two guys who have a pretty decent floors and could turn into quality players for Penn State down the road as well. So, Marty, anything to build off of what Anthony said, and then just I guess your thoughts on just this class as a whole for Penn State on the defensive line. Like I said, they missed on Benedict Ume. That was a tough one, but outside of that, I mean, I don't think there's anything that Penn State fans can really be upset about with this class.
Yeah, all in all, really, really strong first class for Deion Barnes. And some of these guys were guys that might be at Penn State regardless of who the defensive line coach is, but not all of them. I mean, Jaylen Harvey was, as we've said, was a recruitment they had to fight and battle hard in. Um, Malachi Williams, having a Philly guy as your defensive line coach, didn't hurt there. Liam Andrews, who I think has the highest ceiling of anyone of that group, was another recruitment that Florida and South Carolina legitimately were in that. If Barnes and Andrews didn't connect the way they did, he probably winds up in the SEC. So yeah, really good job by Deion Barnes. And I think one thing with Barnes too, it's gonna be fun to watch in the future with his recruiting. We see him put together this really strong first class before he had any on-field results to sell. Now that he's going to be able to sell what this Penn State defensive line is currently doing this season on the recruiting trail as well, that should only make recruiting for him even easier in the future moving forward.
Well said. With that, I think that's a good spot to move on to our next topic, which is the Penn State UMass game from Saturday. Gentlemen, there's not a lot that we can really talk about. There's not a lot we can really take away from a game like this. Penn State won 63-0. After the first two offensive series of the game, Penn State scored on their next 7 offensive drives. Daquan Hardy, of course, was the star of the show. 2 punt returns for a touchdown. The Nittany Lions defense dominated as they usually do, keeping UMass to, I believe, 104 total yards in the game. There was not really, I mean, there's a lot of positives you can take away from it. There's not a ton of negatives you can take away. But at the end of the day, it's one of those games I think you look at it as kind of a glorified scrimmage, a glorified practice, a tune-up game. Penn State in this one did exactly what we expected them to do, and it was a good tune-up for Ohio State this upcoming weekend. Anthony, what is just your initial thoughts on Penn State UMass?
I mean, like you said, what can you really take away from this one? I mean, the defense is really freaking good. I
Yep.
think it's time that we put Daquan Hardy in the same conversation of Kalen King and Johnny Dixon. I think he's proven that obviously from the punt return perspective, he better be our freaking punt returner next week. But other than that, as a corner, he's really good. If he was 6'1" or even 6 feet tall instead of 5'9", he's a potential first, second round pick. And I really believe that in my heart because he's really, really good. He's just really short, and that is his only problem that's holding him back.
Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, Daquan Hardy stole the show. 2 punt returns for a touchdown. I know UMass's defense is porous, and I know they stink. I don't like to say that before a game, but I can say it after. They stink. But they were completely outmatched, completely outclassed, and they had no chance in this one from the very first snap.
Yeah, Daquan Hardy's 2 punt returns, the first time in school history that's been done in one game. James Franklin said that actually may be the school's single season record for punt returns in a game. In a season, which I think I'd be a little surprised by, but I mean, punt returns for a touchdown are hard to do. But yeah, I mean, no matter if it's UMass or Ohio State, return 2 punts for a touchdown in any game is very impressive. Marty, what's your thoughts on Penn State? Initial thoughts on Penn State's 63-0 win, and then I'll get a little bit deeper into some of the other points of discussion in this game.
Yeah, most important thing is you came out of it healthy, right? We said that going into Northwestern, get out of there healthy, and outside of JB Nelson, they did against Northwestern, but still, you have the JB Nelson injury looming. Um, yeah, you got out of there healthy. You did what you needed to do. Your defense is really, really, really damn good. I agree with everything Anthony said about Daquan Hardy. He's just an all-around great football player. Um, and one other thing I think is very important coming out of this, you didn't just get out of this healthy, but to have a bye week followed by UMass followed by Ohio State. Johnny Dixon, Daquan Hardy, Kalen King each played 31 snaps on Saturday. No one else on the defense played over 30 snaps. This team is as well rested and about as healthy as they possibly could be 6 games into the season going to Columbus, and that can only help to be this well rested. Because look how many times in the past we've seen the Ohio State game fall just at all last year. Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio State. We've seen Ohio State sandwich around the Michigan schools before. It seems to always fall in an awful spot on the schedule, and this year's the complete opposite. I know we'll get into Ohio State talk more later and later into the week, but even with Ohio State, it's kind of the opposite of Penn State. Ohio State's limping into this thing pretty banged up. I'm sure a lot of those guys are going to play on Saturday, but a lot of them aren't going to be 100%. So that's a big key that comes out of this UMass game also, is you are healthy and you are rested, and Ohio State is not really either of those things right now.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it, but I think it's fair to say as well that this is still a very good Ohio State team, but this also may be one of the more beatable teams Ohio State has had in recent memory as well. But a little bit more, before we get into that, a little bit more on Penn State UMass, just a couple quick stats. First, Penn State has now won 11 straight games by at least 14 points or more. That is a school record. I mean, that's kind of no matter if you're playing UMass or Ohio State, to have 11 straight games of victories. Sorry, 11 straight games in which you won by 14 points or more. That's impressive. And if you consider it, I think all but 2 of those have been against Power 5 opponents, including one against Utah last year, one against despite losing to Houston in amazing fashion this week, a good West Virginia team, and Iowa this year, who is going to go 11-1 again somehow. So I mean, it's not like Penn State's been facing a bunch of cupcakes over the last year or so. They've been facing a lot of good teams, and that is impressive. Going off that, 13 straight games now for Penn State with 30-plus points scored offensively. That'll be tested next week against Ohio State. The Buckeyes do have a good defense. This one's from Penn State. Penn State's athletic department. 19 different Nittany Lions have recorded at least one tackle for a loss this season, including 15 who have recorded at least one sack. If that doesn't tell you about the depth of this Nittany Lions defense, I'm not sure what will. Penn State this Saturday against UMass had 7 sacks, 14 tackles for a loss. The Nittany Lions are second in the country in sacks this year with, I believe, 24. Going back into Saturday's game specifically, I guess let's talk about the passing attack and Drew a little bit here quickly. Drew finished 16 for 23, 162, 3 touchdowns, so 70% completion percentage. The stats don't show it, but I felt like watching it live there that Penn State was definitely drawing up some more deep shots than we have seen in the last over the season. Drew up more deep shots on Saturday compared to what we've seen over the course of the season so far. Now, Drew didn't always take them. He checked down on a couple of them. He did take shots at a few of them. Had a couple deep shots missed. He on drop passes or Solly overthrew a guy. But do you think it is by coincidence that Penn State brought out a little bit more of the deep passing game this week? Do you think it's James Franklin saying, "Hey, everybody, shut up. We can throw the ball deep"? Or what do you think was the general idea, I guess, behind opening up the passing game a little bit more this week? Is it to give Ohio State something else to think about? Just your general thoughts, Anthony, on what we saw of the passing game on Saturday. And I guess while you're at it, Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren both had a touchdown, 3 combined. Theo had 2. Penn State got the tight ends involved last week, like we said they needed to going forward. So I guess your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. First of all, we complained about it on Twitter for 2 weeks straight that we've had very little explosive passes. So I think Franklin finally hit a point where I was like, fine, if you want them, I'll give them to you. But more than that, yeah, you need to know that you can hit explosive passes because you're going to need it against Ohio State. You can't go 3 yards in a cloud of dust against the Buckeyes and expect to come out of that game victorious. They're going to have to hit some deep shots. They're going to have some explosive plays, whether it be in the running game or the passing game. So this was a good game to try to tune that up and get that a little bit ready. You don't have to show everything against UMass, But, they got a couple of plays. The 30-yard touchdown to Theo was nice. They were able to, break free a couple of times. The running game got going a little bit. Allen had a couple of runs of 17 and 18 yards. So you got it in spurts, but yeah, they're going to need it a little more. So I think it was a combination of things with that. It was great to see the tight ends get going, but for me, the big story of the offense against UMass was Harrison Wallace. And I feel like when he's out there on the field, he's kind of like a security blanket for Drew. We talked about this after the West Virginia game, and I feel like he really changes a lot with his passing attack. I think he looked good. I think he made some nice plays. He's a solid number 2 receiver. He's probably a better number 3 at this point in time, but you don't have a number 3 at all. So, he kind of opens up KLS a little bit, at least in theory. Maybe he opens up the tight ends a little bit more as well. But Harrison Wallace is pretty vital to this passing attack, and I think he's really important to have back and to have healthy.
Yeah, and we did talk about Harrison Wallace returning this week for this past weekend, and we said how it could potentially help open up that passing attack. But I think it does build off what you said, just because having that legitimate number 2 wide receiver out there for Penn State offensively, it gives the defense another person to think about. Harrison Wallace is a wide receiver that opposing defenses have to respect. It's not a Caden Saunders or a Liam Clifford where you probably not respect them as much because, let's be frank, they just haven't done that much yet in their careers. Harrison Wallace showed last year that he has the ability to be a quality wide receiver, so I definitely agree that he allows the Penn State passing game to open up. Wallace, I would say, had a decent day against UMass. 3 receptions, 44 yards, and a touchdown. 3 receptions for 44 yards, no touchdown. Unfortunately for him, I think the 2 plays that stand out was one missed catch that would have been it may have been a touchdown. Either way, it would have been a nice long pass for the Nittany Lions to get downfield. And the other was his first touchback. He fumbled in the game, but those are really the only 2 negatives you could really say about that game for Harrison Wallace. Overall, it was a good return to action for him. Marty, thoughts on the passing game? The tight ends getting involved. Harrison Wallace, third return.
Yeah, I mean, having Trey Wallace back certainly seems to be a big positive for this offense. But to me, the big takeaway was the tight ends. There was the pass. It was Theo Johnson's first touchdown, where it looked like what they did so well with Theo last year: attack the seams, get him attacking the seams. That is something that I thought we'd see a lot more of this year because of this tight end room, because of the success of it last year. It's something I want to see on Saturday because I think your tight ends can absolutely have a field day against Ohio State's linebackers in the middle of the field against this defense as well. And one other thing with the offense, not necessarily the passing game, but in the second half, really late in the first half, Nick Singleton started to kind of run like Nick Singleton. He was he just put his foot in the ground, went bowled guys over. I think his longest run of the day was only like 9 yards. You
10.
want to see the but you want to see the explosiveness, but he didn't look tentative or hesitant for the first time all year. So hopefully that's a sign.
He looked confident. He looked confident.
He did. He finally did. Maybe it just takes playing UMass. I mean, sometimes that's what it takes. You got to play a terrible team and have a game and get it going, and maybe that's what it takes. But if you can get Singleton going, even without the explosiveness, just that Nick Singleton. Like I remember last year against Maryland, in the second half of that game, there were plays Singleton was running the ball, and guys from Maryland at this point, it's like 35-0 or whatever, were just getting out of the way because they didn't want to get hit by him. Like, so even if we get that Nicholas Singleton, which I feel like we finally saw on Saturday, that goes a long way too for this running game. Because I mean, the running game hasn't been as bad as people made it out to be, but if you can get Nick Singleton back to being that just decisive, confident, physical, violent runner, that's a big boost for this rushing attack.
100% agree with you. And just a couple stats on the rushing attack. 37 carries, 246 yards, 4 touchdowns, 6.6 yards per carry. Katron Allen probably had the best day of any running back, 9 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown. Singleton, 15 for 79. Bo Pabula had 6 carries, 59 yards and a touchdown as well. Tank Smith, 2 carries for 41 yards. Trey Potts had a carry for 2 yards and a score. And Drew got in the mix with a QB sneak, a tush push, whatever you want to call it, at the goal line as well. The Nittany Lions offense as a whole had 7 plays of 10 yards or more, including 4 plays of 20 plus yards. 2 of those coming from Tank Smith and Bo Prabula on the ground. The other ones, both passes from Drew. I guess as a whole, guys, offensively, were you pleased with what you saw out of Penn State's offense on Saturday? Did you see enough explosiveness? Did you see enough out of the offensive line? I thought the offensive line dominated UMass's front 7 after the first 2 series for the most part. UMass got a little bit of a push on those first 2 series, but after that, Penn State's offensive line took over. Vega Ione got a ton of snaps, which is notable on the offensive line, especially if JB Nelson can't go against Ohio State. He's going to have to step up into that role. Just to encapsulate the entire offense, are you guys happy with what you saw out of the Nittany Lions? Anthony?
I'm fine with it. I mean, they did what you would expect them to do.
Yeah.
You know, the offense put up 49 points out of the 63. I mean, they started a little bit slow, but, you know, once they got going, you know, they really didn't stop scoring.
Yeah, that Hardy punt return really seemed to flip the switch in everybody.
Yeah, it kind of ignited the sidelines. You know, I'm sure there was it was in the rain. You know, the stadium, even though it showed out better than I thought it would, there wasn't 105,000 people there. I don't know who Penn State's trying to fool with that number. But regardless, you know, you kind of felt like a sleepy start could be on the cards. And then you know, once Hardy returned that touchdown, the punt return, it was just off to the races. But, yeah, I mean, you did what you would expect them to do in a rainy game against UMass. You know, they put up 49 points. They hit some explosive plays. You know, would you have liked to see them be a little bit?
Would you have liked to see them be a little bit more explosive? Are you happy with what explosiveness you did see? I mean, to a degree on the ground, they did have a great day. The Stars had a good day, but at the same time, the 2 longest runs of the day was Tank Smith and Bo. Now you could say that's in the fourth quarter. UMass is worn down by then, but were you happy with the explosiveness that we did see?
It was fun. I mean, I'm fine with it. I mean, I think at this point, I'm starting to think this offense just is what it is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you're going to get, you know, huge, like 50, 60, 70-yard plays. I just don't know if this is what the offense is built to do at this point. But if they can get a couple of 20, 30-yard plays and, you know, the defense is elite, I think we can say that with a lot of confidence. I think they'll be fine. You know, they just got to play their game. I'm sure they've got some tricks up their sleeve. I'm just going to hope they got some tricks up their sleeve for Ohio State. And, yeah, I mean, I find it hard to complain about a 63-0 win.
Yeah.
What do you really want to complain about?
No, yeah. And, you know, more thinking about it before I pass on to Marty, and this may be a lazy comparison because I am an Eagles fan, but this Penn State offense kind of feels like the Philadelphia Eagles offense from last year. The Eagles have explosive plays in them, and they were more explosive than this Penn State team. But the Eagles have no problem with going, you know, on 14, 15 play drives, taking off 7 minutes of the clock, and getting a touchdown out of it. If Penn State, I'm sure if Mike Yurcich could, that's what he would do every drive. Now, I think in the NFL that works a little bit better. I don't know if for Penn State that would be able to. I think it could possibly beat Ohio State. I'm not sure it could beat a Michigan, but as a whole, it kind of feels like the Eagles' offense last year, and that's a good thing for Penn State because Penn State has shown that they can have these long, extensive drives throughout the season. Marty, any thoughts on the offense? Any final thoughts on the offense? Any concerns you have after that game coming out of the bye week, head into Ohio State about the offense?
I'm still concerned about wide receiver as a whole.
Sure.
I mean, you got to see more there.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm with you. I think the offense is perfectly content, just mauling teams, putting together these 12, 13 play drives and kill clock and get a touchdown. And just, yeah, you want to see more explosiveness. I get that. No one wants to be sitting here on October 16th and the longest run play of the year belongs to Tank Smith. Not a knock on Tank, obviously. Like, everybody in the world, when he broke through there, wanted him to just take it to the house. But, like, that can't be happening. You want to see the explosiveness. I'm with you guys to where I'm not sure they need it to get to where they want to get, quite honestly. Um, and I still think if they had to have it, they could. I mean, I definitely think, I know people are going to make jokes about the first play of the game and whether or not that was James like trying to
Yeah,
mess with Corey Geiger or what. But Anthony mentioned it's true. You're playing UMass. You want to try and get this figured out. That's the kind of game where you try and take a few more deep shots and that sort of thing. But
yeah,
yeah, we'll see what happens Saturday. I mean, I'm not going to be surprised if we see them attempt something with Bo Prabula. I mean, I know you said about pulling something out of the bag, and one thing to keep in mind is if you line up a Bo Prabula package and let's say you didn't get a snap off, but Ohio State's defense is discombobulated and they have to waste a timeout, and then you come back out with your regular offense, it's still a win. That's still a positive in
yeah.
what you expect to be a close game and expect timeouts to be important, especially in the second half.
Sure.
So we'll see what happens there. I mean, I'm expecting at least once or twice on Saturday them to take some sort of deep shot. I mean, on the road, James Franklin's always going to play conservatively. He always has, and you're not going to want to turn it over. But at the same time, I just have a hard time not envisioning them at least once or twice trying to dial something up. And I know I already mentioned it, but I think on the topic of explosive pass plays, I think you could really exploit these teams with Theo Johnson on Saturday. So I'm hoping that's something we do see.
Sure. All right. I moving on from the offense. Is there anything you guys really want to talk about the defense? I don't think there's really anything we can add about this defense that we haven't talked about this season. We'll talk about how they match up against Ohio State later this week, but this defense thoroughly dominated the entire game. Like I said, 7 sacks, 14 sacks for a loss. UMass had let me see. 45 passing yards, 64 rushing yards, 45 passing yards, just a little over 100 total yards of offense. Anything you guys want to add about the defense that we haven't talked about yet?
They're really good.
Not really.
By the
Yeah,
way,
I
Adisa
mean,
Isaac has been quietly phenomenal this year. This game helps inflate his numbers a little bit, but he's on pace for, I believe, 15 tackles for a loss and double-digit sacks.
what else can you say about this defense that hasn't already been said?
Yeah.
Their second shutout of the season. I know it was
Second in
UMass.
4 games. 3
Yeah,
games.
I mean, they're just a really, really great unit. The jury's still out a little bit just because you got
They
Ohio
have,
State, you got Michigan. That's going to really determine for me how great, like we know this defense is great, but how great are they? We're going to find out for their first test in Columbus next week. If they hold Ohio State under 30 points, that to me would be a massive win.
and
So,
not to take anything away from what this defense have done, but I mean, you look at it on paper. The only good offense they maybe have faced this season is West Virginia. I mean, UMass has put up stats, but they out talent UMass. They have way better athletes. It was a no contest. So the best offense they faced this year was maybe West Virginia, and that was in week 1. I mean, since then they really haven't faced an offense that really should threaten this Penn State defense when you look at it. So I do think next week and Michigan are going to be the 2 games that we really decide between how if this Penn State defense is just great or is it an elite defense.
yeah,
Yep.
no, 100% agree.
I don't know. You watch this defense, and I get it's not just they're smothering teams. They're
They
just
are.
I don't care who you're playing. To put up the stats they are,
Yeah.
to play on the other side of the line of scrimmage the way they do.
Allowing less than 200 yards a game.
Yeah, it's they've held what Iowa to. I mean, say what you want. It's about Iowa, but it's a Big Ten team.
Yeah.
Held them to 76 yards. I think this was the 4th time in 6 games they've held the opponent under 200 yards, forcing turnovers, chaos, sacks, just everything. Like I don't care who they're playing. What they're doing thus far is insanely
I agree.
impressive.
I agree.
And I just want to add this as well. We talked about this a few episodes ago, but it still rings true. The energy of this defense is just different.
Yeah.
Like Manny Diaz has just brought an energy and an aggressiveness of we are going to get you on the ground and we are going to keep you there and you are not going to get back up. And it runs from the first team. Sorry, Marty, to cut you off, but it runs from the first team all the way down to the 3rd string and beyond. Like they all just want to smother you. And it's fun to watch. Like it's fun to watch this team play defense.
Yeah, and I think that depth is another thing about this team that it's not just the first team, it is second team and part of the third team defense as well. That I mean, this team is on at defensive end 3 deep. I mean, they have 5, 6 guys that they feel confident can go out there and get to the quarterback any given pass rush. The DTs, I think, those were a big question mark coming to the season. Penn State's run defense has been dominant this year outside that West Virginia game, and I think the DT and obviously the DTs are a big part of that. I thought they've been very impressive all year. The linebackers, with Kobe King now starting at middle linebacker, have been good, and that secondary, I don't think there's a better secondary in the country.
Yeah, to me, it's the energy, the body language, like you mentioned. That's part of the defense passing the eye test of I don't care who you play, you're good. I mean, you just look at these guys. You look at Chop, you look at Denai Dennis Sutton, Adiza Isaac, Abdul Carter, Kalen King. Like, these are dudes. These are dudes who are, a lot of which are going to be first-round picks, and are guys that are going to make a lot of money. I've said it before, and I think they'll continue to prove my point Saturday. In my opinion, this is the best Penn State defense I have ever seen. They're faster, they're more physical, they're more violent, they're more athletic. And part of it, like you guys, it's that mindset that comes from Manny Diaz on down of, you know what, hey, you might have burned us for a 30-yard gain. We don't care because we're going to get a TFL and we're going to force a fumble. We're going to pick you off and you're not going to score anyway.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing on this defense I'll say, and it kind of goes back to my point earlier. What I was saying wasn't meant to take anything away from what the defense has been doing. It's been an absolutely insane defense all year. But I will be intrigued now to see how they perform when they're matched up against another team that has this same level of athletes as Penn State. It's going to be a great, great battle to see what this Ohio State offense can do against this Penn State defense, especially that Ohio State receiving core against this Penn State secondary. We'll see if Ibuka is available for Ohio State this weekend. But at the very least, we are in for a great matchup with Marvin Harrison Jr. against the Nittany Lions. I don't think you can completely shut him down, but I think if they can slow him down, they have a great chance of winning. But we'll talk more about that down the road. Let's talk about special teams. That was the big question mark coming into this season, gentlemen. And now through 6 games, 7 weeks, I think the feeling about the special teams has kind of changed. The kicking duties have been locked down by Alex Felkins. He's been great. Raleigh Thompson has been good, decent to good. He hasn't had to be a Jordan Stout or a Blake Gillikin. Or Barney Moore. He's had to do what he's exactly done, and it hasn't hurt Penn State. Could it hurt Penn State down the road? Who knows? We'll see. This will be a big test for him this week. But Penn State's special teams added another layer this weekend against UMass in Daquan Hardy. Believe it or not, that's the first time Daquan Hardy returned punch for Penn State. I know me and Marty were talking about it with our friend Clay. We couldn't believe that was the first time he did it, but that's the first time he did it. Now, he's returned kicks, but that was the first time he's returned punch for his career at Penn State, and phenomenal. Three returns, 129 yards, 2 touchdowns. If this is obviously he's not going to return punts for touchdowns every week, but the fact that Penn State now has that capability on the punt return adds a whole nother part of this team that makes them dangerous. I mean, next week against Ohio State could very well be decided by a big special teams play. We've seen it happen in multiple Penn State games over the last few years against Ohio State. There could not have been a better time for Daquan Hardy to show off his punt return skills than this past week against UMass. I guess I'll start with you, Marty. Just for you, what do you think this adds for Penn State going forward? I mean, James Franklin talked about it a little bit. This is something else that now will keep opposing teams up at night thinking about how to guard Daquan Hardy, because he showed that he can be elusive and he can use his speed and return any punt to the house.
Yeah, the biggest thing is now that you have that on film, like you mentioned, like James said, it just puts another thing on the plate for opposing teams to prep for. It's like you said, you're not going to return every punt for a touchdown. When that threat's there, that changes things. Like, it can cause a punter to maybe overthink things and be shaky. It might change how you try to attack things as a punt team. And as a result, you miss an assignment somewhere and the punter gets rushed, and even if it's not blocked, the punt is bad, and just it does that. It's speed kills. Speed kills, and this is an example of it where you put that pressure on. They go back to the baseball analogy. It, in some ways, it's when Billy Hamilton was at his prime with the Cincinnati Reds. If
It's
he
a name
got
I haven't
on
heard in a
base,
while.
yeah, but if he got on base, it changed everything, right? It
Yeah.
changed everything for how the batter was pitched to, the way you lined up your infield
Yeah.
defense, because you knew he was going to try and run, and you knew at that speed he probably was going to get it. It can be a similar thing to that, to where you change your approach as a punting unit, and there can be unforeseen negative
Yep.
consequences that fall from that, and that's now this is the kind of thing when we've talked all season about them, sandbagging and keeping stuff in the bag for Ohio State, Michigan. I wonder how much of that was a case here of, what, we're going to wait till UMass to even think about putting this on film
Sure.
because we're not going to need it the first 5 games.
Sure.
So yeah, it just adds another wrinkle to all of that.
Anthony, thoughts on Daquan Hardy, what he adds on this punt return? I'm guessing that we're going to see him return the majority of the punts going forward. I'm sure they'll give Caden Saunders some opportunity as well, but I'm not sure how you go away from Hardy now with what he showed this past week.
Yeah, I mean, you listen to Franklin's press conference at the end of the game. Normally, he'll give you some sort of coach speak or some sort of random quote about, oh, we have to go back and watch the film, whatever. He pretty much came out and said that, Hardy won the job moving forward, which is pretty rare for him to do. But I mean, at the same time, how could you not? Like, if he's not winning the job at that point, he's never, like, just Franklin's just stubborn. But yeah, he adds a different element to, this Penn State team. If obviously, yeah, we'll see how, he does returning punts against a better team. But at the same time, like, he clearly has more explosiveness than Saunders does. He clearly is more decisive when, finding a hole to run through than Saunders is. As long as he stays sure-handed and catches the football every time, yeah, he's a weapon anytime he touches the ball. So, and that's exactly what you want. Like Marty said, speed kills. And in big games, even if he doesn't return it for a touchdown, if he, returns it 30 yards and gets them in good field goal position, that can make all the difference.
Sure. Yep. All right. I guess finally to wrap this up very quickly, guys. Just what's your early thoughts on Penn State, Ohio State? Penn State open as about a 6-point underdog. That line is down to 4.5, I believe. Are you guys confident that Penn State could go into Columbus on Saturday afternoon and beat this undefeated top 5 Buckeyes team? Marty, I'll start with you.
Yeah, if this game was in Happy Valley, I would pick Penn State to win by double digits. I think they match up extremely well with Ohio State. I think top to bottom, they're more talented than Ohio State this year. And I mean, obviously, we'll get into some of the more specific things with that later in the week. But yeah, I think they're I think they're going to go and do it. I can't believe I'm sitting here saying I honestly believe they're going to go into Columbus and win, but I think they will. I think this defense can have a field day against Penn or against Ohio State's offense for a lot of different reasons. Again, if this thing was in Happy Valley, I would pick the Nittany Lions to win by double digits. I think they are the better team. I think the fact they're more well rested, as I mentioned earlier, and healthier is a factor as well. But yeah, my early thoughts are Penn State is going to win this football game. I truly believe they're going to go into Columbus and beat the Buckeyes on Saturday.
And we'll get deeper into the game, of course, on Wednesday night or Thursday. Anthony, quick initial thoughts on Penn State versus Ohio State on Saturday.
I mean, it's going to be a great game. I mean, I'm not ready to go as far as Marty is.
Sure.
I think, these teams are very, very close. They're very evenly matched. I think there are certain factors in the game that Penn State, if they are going to win, that's how they're going to win it. And we'll get into that more on Wednesday when we talk about the Ohio State game specifically. But yeah, I think Penn State, in terms of talent and in terms of the matchup, they do match up well with Ohio State. And I really do think if there's a year that they're going to do it, this has to be the year. Like, I don't want to say it's not make or break for James Franklin. I don't want to say that, but it feels like it's now or never if James Franklin is going to get that big win,
Yeah.
the first one since 2016. He has to do it this year, not just because, this with the schedule, you're not going to play Ohio State as much, but also because this is the best all-around team he's ever had and quite possibly ever will have at Penn State.
Yeah.
So this is as big as it gets. It really is.
And I think the one storyline here is this is before the Big Ten expands. This is kind of Penn State's opportunity to show like we belong in this conversation with Ohio State and Michigan as the top teams in the Big Ten and the programs to beat started next season. If Penn State goes 0-2 against Michigan and Ohio State this year, it's just what has become normal in Happy Valley. James Franklin a couple of years ago talked about Penn State being comfortable with being a great program and what it takes to get to an elite program. That was 2019? And 2018, Marty?
18, yeah, that was after the whiteout loss at home where they blew the double-digit fourth quarter lead, and then the Miles Sanders, Will Fries, Chase Young debacle on fourth down.
Right. So that was 2018. And we're sitting here 5 years later, and Penn State's still trying to get to that elite status. Saturday could be that game that gets Penn State to elite status. This, like Anthony said, this is the best team that James Franklin has probably had at Penn State ever. This may be the best team he ever has at Penn State when you think about all the talent that's across that field. And I think next year's team, they could actually be a Big Ten contender, a title contender, because of what could return on the offensive side of the ball. But this defense is never going to be this good again, probably. I mean, it just the level of talent across the board, how this team has been playing, it's probably going to be unmatched. This is not just one of the best defenses we've seen in Penn State history. This is one of the best defenses we've seen in college football the last decade, on paper. You have everything you need to beat Ohio State. Now you have to go out and do it. And now if you can do it by going to Columbus and upsetting a top 5 Buckeyes team, that's a statement victory. That would be the biggest victory of James Franklin's career, Penn State, Vanderbilt, no matter where. This is Penn State's opportunity, in my opinion, to make that jump to elite. This is, I think, you can argue the biggest game of the James Franklin era on Saturday.
Yeah, I will.
Drop.
Yeah, I was going to say, if they win, that's the biggest regular season win he's had by far. Much bigger than 2016, because in 2016 you got them at home.
Yeah. I mean, James Franklin, what's been the big knock on James Franklin? Not being able to beat top 25 teams and not being able to beat those teams on the road especially. This is his opportunity to do that. And like I said, if Penn State misses on Saturday, they still got Michigan, and yeah, you still have that opportunity left. And I think Penn State would trade. I think Penn State obviously wants to go 12-0, but if they can go 1-1 in these two games against these two opponents, it's a win for the program. I think still at that point. But if you can beat Ohio State this weekend, you change the narrative not just for this season, but going forward as a whole. This is a Penn State team that's been on the doorstep of beating Ohio State pretty much every year for the last 5 years. Now, what's going to be the difference this year? Can Penn State get it done? And that'll be what we're watching going into Saturday. And we'll talk more about this game on Wednesday or Thursday next time we meet. But until then, everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Cowan Crowley, beat writer, recruiting analyst at Happy Valley Insider of the Rivals Network. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Go over to Happy Valley Insider, sign up for a free account, or subscribe to us. Get all the inside information, Penn State on the recruiting trail, on the field, and everywhere in between. And be sure to follow us on Twitter as well, at Penn State Rivals, at PSU365. And on there you can find each of our Twitter handles as well. Until we talk later this week, everybody, have a great one. Enjoy your week, and we'll talk to you soon.